Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh. Here are the top stories for tonight. Israel and Hamas trade blame over Gaza truce deal violations, and Gaza doctors say bodies returned by Israel signal torture. That and more coming up on AWANI International. The reopening of the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt remains delayed as Israel and Hamas continue to trade blame over violations of the US-mediated ceasefire. Israel is threatening to resume fighting if Hamas fails to hand over the bodies of all hostages. Hamas, meanwhile, says it's unable to recover more bodies trapped under rubble without specialized equipment. The group also accuses Israel of breaching the truce, claiming at least 24 people have been killed in shootings since Friday.
Hamas handed over the remains of 7 of the 28 known deceased hostages early Wednesday and another 2 later in the day. The group's armed wing said those would be the last for now, falling short of the ceasefire plan's requirement to hand over all of them. Israel, meanwhile, transferred another 45 Palestinian bodies from its custody to southern Gaza, bringing the total to 90. Under the agreement, Israel is to return 15 Palestinians' bodies for every deceased Israeli hostage. Despite the threat to resume war, senior U.S. advisors say Hamas still intends to honor the deal, adding that they are working with mediators to retrieve as many bodies as possible. But any further delays in returning the remaining bodies could increase domestic pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to tie the delivery of humanitarian aid to the hostage issue.
Now, many of the 90 Palestinian bodies returned by Israeli authorities show signs of torture and execution, according to doctors. This includes blindfolds, handcuffs, and bullet wounds to the head, with no other identification provided.
Doctors at Nasser Hospital in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis say the bodies showed scars and discolored patches of skin, indicating that the hostages were beaten before being killed. Hospital officials added that the bodies, kept in refrigerators in Israel, were returned with numbered labels but no names. They say Gaza's hospitals, heavily damaged during 2 years of conflict, have no capacity to carry out DNA analysis. The International Criminal Court is investigating war crime allegations by both Hamas and the Israeli military in the 2-year Gaza conflict, including the killing of Palestinian paramedics and rescue workers whose bodies were found in a shallow grave in March.
We have more after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Ada yang perdebatan bahawa GST perlu dikembalikan semula kerana ada yang mempertikaikan bahawa SST itu tidak efektif.
Isu buruh kanak-kanak bukan sahaja dalam bentuk fizikal tetapi juga bentuk moden yang lebih licik dan juga terselindung.
Kita tengok buruh kanak-kanak dan ada juga buruh paksa kanak-kanak.
Perkumpulan FB dikenali sebagai grup budak-budak sekolah rendah yang didakwa menyebarkan gambar remaja perempuan tidak senonoh telah pun ditutup.
உங்களை யார் இங்க வர சொன்னது? நீங்க அவரை பார்க்க தேவையில்லை. வெளியே போங்க.
சாவுடுன்னு கூட பார்க்காம அந்த பொண்ணு எல்லாரும் முன்னாடியும் உன்னை பிடிச்சிட்டுது. அப்படி யாருன்னு அவரு?
நண்பன்.
அவர் உங்களுக்கு வெறும் ஃப்ரெண்டு தான். எங்களுக்கு அப்பா.
அவனை கொன்னவனை நான் சும்மா விட மாட்டேன். அவன் உங்களுக்கு அப்பாவா இருக்கலாம், ஆனா அவன் எனக்கு நண்பன். Kuri hanya di Prime Video. Stream kesemuanya dengan Astro.
Welcome back. US President Donald Trump says Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has agreed to stop buying oil from Russia, Speaking at the White House on Wednesday, Trump called it a big step towards cutting Moscow's energy revenues and ending the war in Ukraine.
No, we were not happy with him buying oil from Russia because that lets Russia continue on with this ridiculous war where they've lost 1.5 million people. By the way, Russia's lost 1.5 million people, soldiers mostly. This is a war that should have never started, but it's a war that Russia should have won in the first week, and they're going into the 4th year. And I want to see it stop. So I was not happy that India was buying oil. And he assured me today that they will not be buying oil from Russia. That's a big stop.
Russia is currently India's top oil supplier, providing about a third of its imports. Indian officials have long defended those purchases as vital for the country's energy security. The announcement follows months of U.S. pressure. Trump has already imposed tariffs of up to 50% on Indian exports to discourage its Russian oil purchases, a move New Delhi criticized as unfair since other major buyers such as China and Turkey have not faced similar penalties. Trump said he now wants China to follow suit as Washington tightens sanctions and trade pressure on countries still buying Russian crude. India and China are the two largest buyers of Russian oil, taking advantage of steep discounts since Europe cut off imports after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine.
As the US ramps up efforts to curb Russian oil sales, attention is now turning to Japan. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent met Japan's Finance Minister Katsunobu Kato on the sidelines of IMF and G7 meetings in Washington, pressing Tokyo to end all imports of Russian energy.
In a post on X, Bessent said Kato told him Japan will continue coordinating with G7 allies to support peace in Ukraine, but did not confirm any immediate bans. Japan has already agreed with other G7 countries to phase out Russian oil imports following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. However, the country still buys limited volumes of Sakhalin blend crude, a byproduct of the Sakhalin 2 LNG project that provides nearly 9% of its gas supply. U.S. officials have been pushing Japan to shift more of its energy imports to American suppliers, including future investments in a $44 billion LNG project in Alaska.
In other news, US President Donald Trump confirms he has authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations in Venezuela. He adds that the US is considering land operations as it weighs further strikes in the region.
Trump said the move was driven by migration from Venezuela to the US and drug trafficking. He, however, did not clarify whether the CIA has authority to take action against President Nicolas Maduro. Maduro, whose legitimacy as president is internationally contested following last year's disputed elections, appealed on television for peace with the US. The increased US military presence in the region has raised concerns of a possible attack on Caracas. US forces have already conducted at least 5 strikes on suspected drug-carrying boats in the Caribbean since early September, killing 27 people. According to the New York Times, Trump's latest order would allow the CIA to carry out lethal operations in Venezuela and a range of operations throughout the Caribbean.
The US is close to finalizing a trade deal with South Korea, with an announcement expected in the next 10 days. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the two countries are in the process of ironing out the final details.
US and South Korean officials are meeting this week on the sidelines of the annual meetings of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank in Washington. The two sides are expected to finalize details of South Korea's $350 billion investment commitment under a bilateral trade deal struck in July. Asked if Treasury would support setting up a currency swap facility, Bessent said it would be up to the Federal Reserve. Both sides are keen to complete the trade agreement before the end of the month, when Seoul will host an Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. South Korea's presidential office says U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to arrive on October 29th. Trump is also expected to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on the sidelines of the forum.
Chinese state media has issued a 7-point rebuttal to U.S. criticism over its new rare earth export controls. Beijing says the measures are in line with international practice and necessary to protect national interests. The move follows U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer calling the policy a global supply chain power grab and warning of possible tariffs on as soon as November 8th.
Beijing says it informed Washington in advance about the licensing changes and that its policy mirrors rules used by other major economies while remaining in line with international practice. State media, The People's Daily, also highlighted that the U.S. maintains export controls on over 3,000 items, far more than China's 900. It accused Washington of long abusing national security concerns to restrict Chinese tech firms, calling Beijing's measures a reciprocal response. Tensions between Washington and Beijing have been rising since a September call between President Trump and President Xi Jinping, with each side blaming the other for stoking trade frictions.
French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has survived 2 no-confidence votes, giving France a brief respite from weeks of political turmoil. He narrowly survived the first motion by just 18 votes before defeating a second challenge from the far-right National Rally with a wider margin. The first motion, filed by the far-left France Unbold party, received 271 votes, short of the 289 needed to topple the government. The second, led by Marie Le Pen's National Rally, gained 144 votes. Appointed in September, Lecornu had briefly resigned earlier this month before being reappointed. Now, his move to suspend a controversial pension reform helped win over some socialist lawmakers, securing a temporary lifeline for his fragile government. But the reprieve may be short-lived as he now faces the uphill task of passing a budget through a deeply divided lower house. Now, Malaysia's decision to host US President Donald Trump at the ASEAN summit is being framed as strategy, not political alignment. But Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim faces a careful balancing act. The visit could strain ties with China, a key political and economic partner, and risk backlash at home over Trump's support for Israel. But Institute of Strategy and International Studies Chairman, Professor Dr. Faiz Abdullah, says Malaysia's priority is to engage all major powers while protecting its national interests.
It's not about being over-dependent. It's about the reality of what we have. In my book, I've stated very clearly, we have to balance between the need to enforce our strategic diplomacy and at the same time ensure that we are not wholly dependent on any party.
Yes.
Faiz added that Malaysia's role as ASEAN chair leaves little room to exclude major global powers from regional dialogue, including the United States.
Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN. You're talking about the East Asia Summit. You're talking about the ASEAN-US Summit. It's not that we can just raise a flag, sorry, you're not invited, we're not, because that doesn't work. I acknowledge there are serious criticisms of Trump. And let me also preface by saying that Malaysia, the Prime Minister, must take into consideration the concerns, the domestic concerns about this issue. But having said that, you cannot compromise trying to grandstand and play to the gallery of populism and sacrifice your long-term strategic foreign policy.
Dr. Faiz was speaking at the launch of his new book, Strategic Shifts, Preparing Malaysia for a Turbulent Future, last week. Also present was Minister of Foreign Affairs, Datuk Seri Muhammad Hassan, who underscored the importance of adaptability in Malaysia's foreign and domestic policy.
What does strategic autonomy mean for a country like Malaysia? Can we remain non-aligned when the space to do so is shrinking? Externally, this call for a foreign policy that is both principled and flexible. Principle in holding on to our core values and national interests, yet flexible enough to adapt to shifting realities. Domestically, it requires political will to push through reforms that will prepare our institutions, our economy, and our people to what lies ahead.
That wraps up AWANI International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the rivalries, strategies, and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on our social media accounts. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you for watching and good night.